Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sim Kern, pronouns they, them. I'm a trans, non-binary author-tuber and booktuber. And today I'm going to be sharing my anti-racist, anti-TERF, abolitionist TBR for the rest of 2020. White people should be committed to reading Black authors, not just in the moment when there's a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I wanted to share with you not just a month-long TBR, but what I'm planning to read over the course of the next year, as well as what I'm reading over the course of this month. I have 10 books I'm going to talk about. Most of them are by Black authors, but some are by Indigenous authors, and there's a book I'm reading on police abolitionism by a white author. But I think that it falls into this category and it's good to mention as part of these topics that I'm going to be reading about. So during June, I've already started and I'm almost finished with reading The End of Policing by Alex Vitale. That's the one book I'm going to mention that's by a white author. And I wanted to read it because one reason is that it's free. I'll put that link in the description below. The idea of police abolition is really catching on right now, and I think that it's great that the publishers have decided to make that text available to anyone who wants to learn more about this issue. I'll have a video soon coming out with my thoughts on that book. I hope to be someone who's well versed enough in police abolitionist thought that abolitionism is something I can persuasively explain to other people at the drop of a hat. It's important to mention that police abolitionism wasn't invented by white people. This is a centuries old struggle. Police forces date back to the early days of slave patrols in the South, and they were union busters in the North. The people who got me into police abolitionism were Angela Davis and Assata Shakur, who are Black women, and I've read their books in the past. But I think The End of Policing, because it's free to everyone, I think it's a great resource to be sharing right now. And it's a very contemporary, it was published last year. So it's, I think, the most contemporary book on police abolitionism that we have available. So for the month of June, obviously we have a major Black Lives Matter movement happening. And at the same time, there's been a resurgence in TERF rhetoric being led by J.K. Rowling, of all people, who is fucking canceled. So I wanted to focus for Pride Month on reading Black trans authors. I'm not a very prolific reader, so I'm hoping I can read 2 books in June in addition to The End of Policing, which I'm just finishing up. So the first book I want to read is fiction. I'm going to read Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This book I had already owned. I didn't just buy this. I wanted to read this for a long time since I first heard about this coming out. I've never read anything by Case and Calendar. They're a non-binary author. I'm pretty sure their pronouns are there. Yeah, there. They're a non-binary author that I've been following on Twitter for a long time. And so I'm excited, and I love their presence on Twitter, especially right now in this moment. Their takes have been sparkling. Go ahead and follow Case and Calendar and you will learn a lot. And I know that it's a heartwarming romance, and amidst all the other stuff that I'm planning to read, which is very, very heavy, I'm really excited and looking forward to this joyful book. The second book I'm going to try to read by the end of June is also by a Black trans author, C. Riley Snorton. And the book is Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity. So I'm going to be reading a lot. I'm going to be pushing myself to read a lot more nonfiction than I normally do this year. So I'm really interested in queer history. All of queer history I need to learn more about. I don't know enough about our history. I mean, part of that's really purposeful. It's something that's hidden from us and that we're not taught in schools. I'll read you the blurb. Black on Both Sides identifies multiple intersections between Blackness and transness from the mid-19th century to present day anti-Black and anti-trans legislation and violence. Drawing on a deep and varied archive of materials, C. Riley Snorton attends to how slavery and the production of racialized gender provided the foundations for an understanding of gender as mutable. And C. Riley Snorton is a trans man. He teaches at Cornell University. He's an associate professor of American Studies and Ethnicity. Why don't you make him a full professor, Cornell? Come on. I'm seeing a lot of people with calls to read more Black trans authors, and I haven't been seeing this book mentioned. So I hope that more people will join me in reading this book this month. The next couple books are all nonfiction, and they're me trying to educate myself, and I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to read them. But basically, I identify as an abolitionist and a leftist. I'm somewhere between like some socialism and some anarchism. I'm not exactly sure. I came to a lot of these ideas through fiction or more narrative books. So I haven't really read as much leftist theory. So, for example, reading The Dispossessed, which is a sci-fi book by Ursula K. Le Guin, made me an anarchist, or at least interested in anarchism, but I haven't read anarchist thought. So I kind of need to fill those gaps. The first book I'm excited about reading is Futures of Black Radicalism, a recent collection of essays by leading Black radical leftist thinkers. Angela Davis is the only person on this list who I know of, which I sure makes me ignorant. So I'm excited to read these essays by about 20 authors, internalize their ideas, but then hopefully like find them on social media and follow them, be knowing what their discourse is and hearing from them and learning from them. So I'm excited about this book. I'll read you the blurb. Dramatic protests have risen up in scores of cities and campuses. There is renewed engagement with the history of Black radical movements and thought. Here, key intellectuals inspired by the new movements and the seminal work of scholar Cedric J. Robinson recall the powerful tradition of Black radicalism while defining new directions for the activists and thinkers it inspires. And of course, this book was published and written, these essays were all written before the current immediate moment. They were all written after Ferguson, Palestine, Baltimore, and Hong Kong protests, which of course laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now. The book makes clear that new Black radical politics is thoroughly internationalist and redraws the links between Black resistance and anti-capitalism. We love to hear it. So I'm excited about this book and learning more and being less of like an imposter leftist and actually knowing what I'm talking about. The next book is by an Indigenous author, Nick Estes. And this is about the history of Indigenous struggles. Again, it's kind of like a retrospective that's also looking to the future. So it's kind of about the history of Indigenous protests and then looking to the future. In Our History is the Future, historian Nick Estes tells a spellbinding story of the 10-month Indigenous resistance at Standing Rock in 2016, animating the lives and characters of the leaders and organizers and emphasizing the powerful leadership of women. Alone, this would be a brilliant analysis of one of the most significant social movements of this century, but embedded in the story and inseparable from it is the centuries-long history of the Oseti-Sakowins' resistance to United States genocidal wars and colonial institutions. Hell yeah. And woven into these entwined stories of Indigenous resistance is the true history of the United States as a colonialist state and a global history of European colonialism. This book is a jewel, history and analysis that reads like the best poetry, certain to be a classic work, as well as a study guide for continued and accelerated resistance. So I'm definitely feeling like I need a study guide for continued and accelerated resistance. I need to keep this momentum going, again, like not just past this moment or this month, but like all year round if we want to see the radical global change that we need to. So I'm charged up about reading this book. Another history of struggle so that you can learn from it. This is actually a historical text. So this is The Grounding with My Brothers by Walter Rodney. And this is a classic book of essays from the 1960s, I want to say. 1969. I think it would pair nicely with Futures of Black Radicalism. This is kind of like history of Black radicalism. So Walter Rodney was an important Black activist and radical, a renowned historian of colonialism, a leader of Black power and Pan-African movements across the diaspora, most notably with the Guyanese Working People's Alliance. His life and work brought together the struggles for independence on the African continent with the striving of Black working classes of North American and the Caribbean basin. So you're kind of seeing across these books the idea of like the struggle for Black liberation as a global and international movement, solidarity with Indigenous people, and, you know, opposition to colonialism and imperialist forces across the world. Like, that's what needs to happen. That's what's been happening. That's the history of Black activism. That's why Black activism will liberate the whole world. When Black lives matter, everyone's lives will then matter. That's what I'm reading. I'm excited about that one. The last nonfiction book on my list is kind of it's a poetic nonfiction. It's a lyrical nonfiction. So it's Audre Lorde's Zami, A New Spelling of My Name. I have read Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. which is considered one of like the seminal texts of intersectional feminism. And if you've never read Audre Lorde, I would probably recommend that one first so you can get familiar with her thoughts and her contributions that she made to really defining intersectional feminism and the problems that were tackled by intersectional feminism. I read that and loved it and was inspired by it. And then I bought this. I bought this several years ago and I started it, and it's a very poetic autobiography. And sometimes I have a hard time with like extremely lyrical writing. So I picked it up and read a few pages, and I set it down and I was like, I'll read this another time. So when I'm feeling like I want to read something very lyrical and beautiful and dense and literary and rich, I'm gonna pick up this book this year. Another book I DNF'd, but I'm committed to reading this year. So this is The Moor's Account by Leila Lalami. Leila is an African writer, originally from Morocco, I believe. And this book I started and read like maybe 50 pages of, and it was so brutal that I put it down and was like, I don't remember what was going on in my life, but I was like, I don't have the emotional reserves to be reading this book right now. But I think it's really important that I actually persist and bear witness and read this. So this book, I think, pairs a lot with this book because The Moor's Account is about a African slave who is brought over with the original conquistadors. It's so brutal, and as you're reading it, you're like, oh God, this is really it. This is what it was really like. And it's so different than the colonialist bullshit, hooray for Christopher Columbus narrative we've been told. And if you're a reasonably well-informed person, you know by now that Christopher Columbus was a genocider and that what all of the original colonists did in America was fucking a nightmare. Maybe you've heard that and you understand that, but you haven't like experienced the horror. And reading this book, like, you will experience the horror, and it's so ugly. I think as white Americans, we need to read that and confront that history, and I need to stop running away from this book and like actually confront it. His tale illuminates the ways in which our narratives can transmigrate into history and how storytelling can offer a chance at redemption and survival. So I know this book has been extremely well lauded. It was the finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and I am going to finish it this year. 2 more fiction books that I will hopefully get to this year. I didn't buy these recently. These were already on my shelves. I just hadn't read them yet. The first is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I devoured the Broken Earth trilogy last year. Absolutely fell in love with N.K. Jemisin as an author. So I'm excited about this one. This is like a city that is coming alive, and there's like psychic people who like, there's like tentacles coming up out of the city, and the city is like maybe eating people. I'm not exactly sure. Excited to read it. And then this is Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. I don't read like a whole ton of YA. I think this is YA. Oh no, this is adult fiction. Ooh, that makes me want to read it more. I know I'm like the worst YA author. I don't read a whole ton of YA. Ella has a thing. She sees a classmate grow up to become a caring nurse, a neighbor's son murdered in a drive-by shooting, things that haven't happened yet. Kev, born while Los Angeles burned around them, wants to protect his sister from a power that could destroy her. But when Kev is incarcerated, Ella must decide what it means to watch her brother suffer while holding the ability to wreck cities in her hands. Hell yeah. So big riot energy. I'm excited to read this book. It's definitely something that's on a lot of people's lists right now. So I'm going to check that out at some point this year. So those are the books I'm going to read this year that focus on anti-racist, activism and organizing, anti-imperialist, anti-Kyriarchy. Kyriarchy is one of my favorite words because it's like the intersection of all those things: white, Christian, cis, straight, supremacist. All those systems of oppression put together is Kyriarchy, and this is my anti-Kyriarchy reading list. I think it's really important that we're all, as a booktube and bookstagram and book Twitter community, that we are not just reading and uplifting Black voices in this moment when it's a trend, but that it's something that we commit to year round. I got into activism as an environmentalist because that's just something I've always been super passionate about. And I mean, I still am. I write cli-fi, climate change fiction. I used to think, everything has to be focused on the climate. Like all our activism needs to be focused on divesting from fossil fuels. Why isn't everyone focusing on that? That's the biggest problem in the world because everyone dies if the climate is wrecked. But as I grew and, learned more and became educated, I realized that there is no climate liberation without Black liberation. We treat people as disposable. We treat ecosystems as disposable. And the people that we treat as the most disposable are Black people worldwide. Chevron and Shell and these oil companies in the United States, they locate their refineries in the midst of Black and brown neighborhoods, causing higher rates of asthma and cancer clusters that kill far more Black and brown people than police. Our highways we run through, we have car culture, which is toxic and poisonous and killing the planet and killing all of us, but mostly is killing Black and brown people because we route our highways through Black and brown neighborhoods. Pollution, we situate our landfills and we dump toxic waste near Black and brown people, both in the United States and worldwide. We export our trash to non-white countries. It was environmentalism that led me to anti-racist activism, and I now see anti-racist activism as central to all other struggles. Whether you're a leftist, whether you're an abolitionist, whether you're an environmentalist, whether you're an LGBTQ activist, Black Lives Matter has to be at the heart of your struggle because Black people have borne the brunt of the world's oppression for centuries. And when all Black people are liberated, all people are liberated. In particular, when we see the intersections of these things, when Black, disabled, trans, queer people are liberated, then truly everyone will be liberated. That's the world that I want to work towards. That's where I want to go. And I know that Black radical thinkers and activists are the people that will get us there. We as white activists need to take the lead from Black radicals and Black activists and be their allies as best as we can be. One of the best ways that I know how to become a better ally is to just read a lot of Black authors. And so that's what I'm going to do this year. And I'm going to keep showing up to meetings and protests and actions and calling into school board meetings and calling my representatives and supporting candidates who will actually be progressive in the next round of elections and trying to get people into office who will be receptive when you call them, showing up in the streets, donating to bail funds, donating what you can to Black Lives Matter and anti-racist organizations and bail funds, and doing whatever we can to get the boot off our necks. So I hope my fellow white YouTubers and anyone who's following me got something out of this video, and that you're committing to reading Black authors and reading about Black activism and supporting Black activism, not just now, not this month, not when it's a hashtag, but all year long, all your life long. Yes, your whole life. That's it for me today. I'm gonna go get to reading. I'll have a video coming out on that Police Abolitionist book I read soon. Thanks for watching.